Welcome to Through the Bible with Pastor Michael, a podcast from First Baptist Church in Mustang, Oklahoma. Here's Pastor Michael.
December, day 20, looking at Revelation 11 and 12, along with Isaiah 61. Of course, there are 25 readings a month in the plan that we are going through, and today we are in day 20, so that's how close we are. Revelation 11 and 12. So the Revelation tells us there's going to be two witnesses that faithfully preach the gospel during the second half of the tribulation. They will proclaim God's judgment upon the earth. Speaks of a measuring rod, which speaks and signifies of ownership. This is defining the parameters of God's possessions. Takes us back to Zechariah 2. God is essentially measuring off Israel for salvation and special protection. These two witnesses are going to prophesy for 3.5 years. This does not mean that they're going to be merely predicting things. Prophecy here means to proclaim and to preach. And so the last half of the tribulation, these men will be preaching salvation through Jesus Christ alone. It's interesting, the word witnesses here is the plural form from which we get our English word for martyr. The Old Testament, Deuteronomy 17, Matthew 18 tells us truth is confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. These two witnesses have great power. They can kill, they can shut up the sky. The drought will be another reason why there's such widespread devastation and death. It says in verse 7, when they have finished their testimony, the beast will kill them. It shows that they will not be killed one day before God's purpose for them is fulfilled. They're going to be hated by the world, and yet the world will not be sovereign over their lives. It says the entire world's going to view their bodies. For centuries, that would be impossible. That would have seemed utterly ridiculous. It's part of the reason why everybody has tried to explain away what Revelation teaches, because for so long what it said would be impossible. How in the world would the whole world see this? Of course, in our world today, with internet and satellites and the like, it's not hard at all to see how the whole world would view something. It says the whole world's going to view their dead bodies, and back from Deuteronomy 21, to expose the enemy's dead body is the ultimate way to dishonor and to desecrate them. Even in our day, it's a huge thing if in a war somebody shows dead soldiers on television. That's not supposed to happen. And so we see what happens to the two witnesses here. It says they're going to rejoice over them. They're going to celebrate and send gifts to one another. It's going to essentially be a spontaneous holiday. Much rejoicing happens over the death of these two powerful prophets. Now, why is that? Why so much rejoicing? Well, partly because these religious zealots, as they would see them, have been away with, but there's more than that. For 3.5 years, they've preached the gospel, which is an insult to the world. They've described these disasters such as earthquakes and death and plagues and destruction, the contamination of vegetation, of water. They've declared that to be God's judgment upon the earth. And the wicked of the world's laughed at them. And now with them dead, it seems like they were wrong. It seems like God must be a liar, and the world can now return to this godless world where man is the center of all things. And so this is why it's such a massive thing to the world that these two witnesses will be killed. And so the whole entire planet will celebrate. If you think about it, while we see the gospel as such good news, if you reject the gospel, if you're an unbeliever, the gospel is highly offensive. The gospel declares that you're a sinner. The gospel declares that you can't save yourself. The gospel declares that your sin is worthy of judgment. And for those who reject the gospel, that's utterly offensive. Who are you to say that I'm deserving of judgment? Who are you to say that I need to repent of my sins? Who are you to say that I need to have my sins atoned by Christ. And so when, just like when Christ died, when he was crucified, those who hated him celebrated. Those who rejected his message of hope and salvation and forgiveness of sins rejoiced at his death because it seemed like he had lost. It seemed like the prophecies and promises of the Lord were not going to take place. Of course, we know with the resurrection that was all proven to be false assumptions, and in the end, of course, the gospel is our only hope. So they're raised from the dead by the Lord. Imagine this being played over and over and over again on the internet or whatever people are using at the time this takes place. And verse 11 says, great fear fell upon those who were watching them. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? They are called up to heaven. An earthquake takes place. And you see this parallel between the two witnesses and Jesus. Both have a 3-year ministry. Both are representing the law and the prophets. Both are killed for proclaiming a message that is deemed offensive to the world. Both dead for 3 days, both raised from the dead, both ascended into heaven, both have an earthquake that rocks the world. And essentially what you're seeing here in Revelation 11 is the nation of Israel having a second chance to trust the Messiah, to trust the promise of God. Anyone who dies without Christ, Jew or Gentile, there is no second chance for salvation individually. In a national sense, though, the nation is essentially getting a second chance here to embrace the one that they have rejected. Then you get the final woe. It's the seventh trumpet that's coming. And verse 15 says, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord. This is saying that this world, which in a sense belongs to the devil, in a sense, he's the prince of this world, the prince of the power of the air. But just a reminder that even in that sense, it's limited, because we know that ultimately everything in the earth is the Lord's. Though in God's sovereignty, Satan has power, albeit limited, over the earth. This verse speaks of God in his glory doing away with evil and having the earth made right. This will happen ultimately the second coming, but this verse speaks of it as being an absolute certainty. The seventh trumpet is mentioned in chapter 11, verse 15, though the judgments associated with it are not described until chapter 15. You get a picture of the 24 elders representing the church. And then verse 18 says the nations were enraged. The earth is angry with God. They want to defeat him. They want to destroy him. They're out to stop his plan and his purpose. And the question is, what does God do? What does God do when rulers are angry? What does God do when the nations rage against him? And of course, we know the answer to that from Psalm 2, verse 4. The Lord is in the heavens and he laughs. The thought of small men trying to defy God is ridiculous. Judgment will come on those who have destroyed the earth, and the earth will feel the wrath of God. In Revelation 12, victory is celebrated as the accuser is defeated. I think about the hymn of A Mighty Fortress. It says, the Prince of Darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him. So the enemy will be defeated and believers overcome by the blood of the Lamb. This takes us back to 1 Peter 1, 18 and 19 that says, knowing you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life, inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood as of a spotless lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. So verse 11 gives us some insights into what true salvation is. Chapter 12, verse 11. True salvation is a heart that's been changed by God, our testimony of change, and our endurance to the end. This is what a true believer is. A true believer is one whose heart's been changed by God, who gives testimony of the change that God has made, and we prove that our words are true by enduring to the end. In the latter part of chapter 12, the devil attacks Israel. Israel, the woman here, Israel, is given wings, a reference to protection. She flees into the wilderness, and it says is nourished for a time and times and half a time. A time is a year, times 2 years, and half a time, half a year. So a year, 2 years, that's 3, and half a year, 3.5 years. So Satan attacks the redeemed of Israel. They will have to flee, and they will run in the wilderness, and God will provide for his people in miraculous ways. The devil will try to kill faithful Israel, yet the Lord will use the earth as his instrument of protection over his people, just as he's done before in the Old Testament as the Egyptians pursued the Israelites. And so the devil will try to attack Israel. The devil will try to kill faithful Israel. The devil will try to attack all who are believers. Isaiah 61, though, of course, this Isaiah is, 7 centuries before the book of Revelation, but it ties in here because Isaiah 61, we read this, that the Lord will comfort his people and salvation will come. So while we are waiting, one of the questions that always comes up is, how should we live? Should we be indifferent about the things of the world? Should we consider ourselves defeated? Should we not care about the gospel advancing and gaining ground because the Lord's returning? And I would just say this, understand that ultimately God's sovereign plan, his decree is going to take place. Ultimately, the Lord will descend, that Christ will come again. He will set up his kingdom. All things will be made right. Until that time, we know God's will is for the church to be triumphant, for the church to move forward. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't face persecution. That doesn't mean that we don't face attack. That doesn't mean there's not going to be martyrs. We know there are going to be. But we are on the winning side. And one of the things that Christians in the church must be very careful of is to not go through life with a defeatist attitude. It's true that there are going to be attacks against God's people, attacks against the church. It's true that tribulation is coming. That's all true. However, the church is still triumphant, and I think we should think triumphantly. Now, that doesn't mean that every earthly situation is going to work out in an earthly sense the way that we maybe would most want it to. What it does mean is that we're on the winning team. What it does mean is that because he lives, we live. What it does mean is we have the message, the gospel that can save. And so we ought to proclaim with boldness, serve with gladness. And the church ought to take very seriously our role in proclaiming the gospel truth and not lay back and think we're defeated, not retreat back and live in fear of the world. With courage and with boldness, we march forward, proclaiming the truth, knowing that his truth is marching on. And we, by God's grace, as Christians, get to proclaim the truth, teach the truth, call people to respond to the truth, and with joy and with victory, we ought to do what God's called us to do, and that is to be the church and to proclaim the good news that Jesus saves and Christ is returning and coming again.